The music suddenly stopped. In the middle of the stage, a small boy, only 6 years old, clung to André Rieu'S legs without anyone ever letting him there. The audience gasped. Security personnel rushed forward, and his mother desperately tried to make her way through the crowd. Brixton Kane, the security chief, gestured for someone to remove the child immediately. André stood motionless, looking at everyone, placed his hand on the child's shoulder, and did what left the entire symphony hall stunned and in disbelief. 3 days earlier, Sloane Whitmore had been trying to calm her son Dashiell in their small apartment in Boston. It had been one of those days again, a day when the world felt too big, too loud, too overwhelming for her 6-year-old son. Dashiell had always struggled with social situations. Since he was 3 years old, he had shown signs of extreme shyness and anxiety that went beyond normal childhood fears. Other children played carefree on the playground, but Dashiell hid behind his mother's legs when strangers approached. "Mom, why are they looking at me?" he had asked that morning as they walked through downtown Boston. "They're not looking at you, sweetheart," Sloane had answered, knowing it wasn't true. People did look at the little boy who clung to his mother, who refused to go to the bakery alone, who broke into tears when there were too many stimuli. The child psychologist had used words like anxiety disorder and selective mutism, but to Sloane, Dashiell was simply her little boy who perceived the world differently than others. But one thing always calmed him: music. Not just any music, specifically André Rieu'S music. Since he was 2 years old, he could listen for hours to the cheerful waltzes and classical melodies. When an anxiety attack threatened, Sloane would put on a CD of the Johann Strauss Orchestra and watch her son slowly relax. "That wonderful violinist," Dashiell always called him. "When is he coming to see us, Mom?" Sloane would never have expected an answer to that question. Tickets for André Rieu concerts were expensive and often sold out months in advance. But when her friend Poet called with unexpected news, everything changed. "Sloane, you won't believe it. My boss had 2 tickets for the concert this weekend, but he can't go. He's giving them away. Do you want them?" Sloane's heart skipped a beat. "For the concert at Symphony Hall this weekend?" "Yes. 2nd row, almost at the front." She looked at Dashiell, who was sitting on the couch with headphones on, listening to the Blue Danube for the 100th time that week. Would he be able to handle it? All those people, all that commotion. On the other hand, this was his biggest dream. Every evening he asked when he could see the violinist. This could be his only chance. "I'll take them," she said impulsively. "Thank you, Poet." That evening, she told Dashiell. His reaction was typical. First pure joy, then panic. "Really, Mom? Really? Will we see the violinist?" "Yes, sweetheart. Saturday. But there will be a lot of people, right? A lot of strangers." Sloane saw the fear in his eyes and doubted her decision. "We can just go and see how you feel. If it's too scary, we'll go home. Do you promise?" "I promise." The following days were a roller coaster of emotions. Dashiell was excited but also anxious. He practiced his concert routine, sitting still, hands in lap, not talking during the music. Sloane had told him everything about how concerts work, about the audience, about having to be quiet. But there was something she hadn't anticipated. Friday night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his small body trembling with nervousness. "Mom," he called at midnight, "I'm scared." Sloane sat down next to his bed. "What are you afraid of? What if the violinist doesn't see me? What if he doesn't know I'm there?" "He doesn't have to see you, darling. You'll see him and hear his music." "But Mom," his voice became a whisper, "I want him to know I like his music. I want him to know I'm there." Sloane felt a twinge of worry. She recognized that look in his eyes, that intense need for connection that sometimes led to impulsive actions. "Dashiell, promise me you'll stay with Mom during the concert. Promise me you won't run away." "I promise, Mom." But even as he said it, something stirred in his little head. A plan he couldn't put into words, a longing that was stronger than his fear. Saturday afternoon, Sloane dressed him in his best clothes. A small navy blazer his grandmother had bought him, a white shirt, dress shoes. He looked like a little adult, but his eyes betrayed his nervousness. "How do you feel?" she asked as they walked to Symphony Hall. "Like butterflies in my stomach, but also like Christmas morning," he answered. Symphony Hall was already full of people when they arrived. Thousands of visitors streamed to their seats. The atmosphere was festive and expectant. Dashiell shrank more and more next to his mother, overwhelmed by the crowd. "Too many people," he whispered. "It'll be better when we sit down," Sloane assured him. Their seats were indeed in the 2nd row, a perfect view of the stage. Dashiell sat down and stared wide-eyed at the empty stage, where his hero would soon stand. "That's where he'll come," he pointed to the center of the stage. "That's where the violin man will come." Coral Ashford, a middle-aged woman sitting next to them, smiled at Dashiell. "Are you a big fan of André Rieu?" Dashiell nodded shyly, but said nothing. "My grandson is your age," Coral said kindly. "He loves the violin too." Sloane smiled gratefully. "Dashiell listens to his music every day. How sweet. This must be a wonderful evening for him." The concert began promptly at 8 p.m. When André Rieu walked onto the stage with his characteristic smile and waving hand, Dashiell almost jumped from his seat. "There he is," he whispered so loudly that people around him smiled. The first notes of Die Fledermaus filled Symphony Hall, and Dashiell was in heaven. He moved to the rhythm of the music, his little hand conducting in the air, his gaze fixed on André Rieu. But as the concert progressed, something unexpected happened. Instead of calming down, Dashiell became increasingly restless, not from fear this time, but from excitement, from an overwhelming need to be part of what he was seeing rather than just a spectator. "Mom," he whispered during a break between songs, "can I go to him?" "No, sweetheart, we stay here." But Dashiell barely heard her. His gaze was fixed on André Rieu, who stood only 20 meters away. So close, so very close. And then, at the climax of The Blue Danube, it happened. Dashiell stood up. "Dashiell, sit down," Sloane hissed, but it was too late. Her son had already left their row, his small body pushing between the legs of standing spectators. At first she thought he needed the bathroom, but then she saw him heading straight for the stage. "No, no, no," she tried to follow him. But the rows were too full, the people too close together. On stage, André Rieu was completely absorbed in the music, his violin soaring above the orchestra. He had no idea about the small drama unfolding in the audience. Thaddeus Sterling, the main concert organizer, stood at the stage edge and saw it first. A small child pushing forward, obviously unaccompanied. He spoke into his headset to the security personnel. "We have a situation. Unaccompanied child approaching the stage." Brixton Kane, the security chief, recognized it immediately. 30 years of experience in security had taught him that children are unpredictable, especially at large events. They could panic, get lost, or worse, get hurt in the crowd. "I'll get him," he said into his microphone as he made his way through the crowd. But Dashiell was faster than expected. With the determination only children can muster when they want something, he squeezed through adults, crawled under people, and slipped past bodies. People in the audience began to notice. Some smiled, thinking it was a cute child looking for his parents. Others looked concerned, wondering where his guardians were. "Look at that little boy," someone pointed. "Where's he going? Is he lost?" Coral Ashford, who had been sitting next to Sloane, had pulled out her phone to capture the sweet moment of a child enjoying the concert. She had no idea she was about to film one of the most viral moments in American concert history. Dashiell reached the first barrier, a low fence separating the audience from the stage area. For an adult, it would have been an obstacle, but for a determined 6-year-old, it was just a challenge. He climbed over it. Now more people noticed. A murmur went through the first rows as spectators nudged each other and pointed at the small figure moving toward the stage. "Is that a child?" someone whispered. "Where are his parents? Someone needs to stop him." Sloane had finally fought through the crowd and now stood at the barrier. "Dashiell," she called, but her voice was drowned out by the music and the murmur of the audience. On stage, the orchestra played on. Most musicians didn't notice the unfolding drama. André Rieu stood with his back to the audience, focused on his orchestra, guided by the passion of the music. Brixton Kane had also reached the barrier and climbed over it. He was a large man, trained in crowd control, but he had to be careful. The last thing he wanted was to scare a child, or worse, cause an incident that would disrupt the entire concert. But Dashiell was already at the stage edge. The Symphony Hall stage wasn't high, maybe 3 feet, but for a small child, it was a mountain. Dashiell looked up at his hero, so close he could see his shoes, and then he did something no one expected. He climbed onto the stage. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't easy. His tiny arms could barely grasp the edge. His short legs kicked in the air, but with the willpower of a child pursuing his dream, he pulled himself up. The first orchestra member to see it was Leif, the cellist on the right. His eyes widened in surprise as he saw a small head appear above the stage edge, followed by a small body in a navy blazer. He began, then paused. The sudden silence of the cello caught the attention of the other musicians. One by one, they stopped playing, their eyes fixed on the small figure now standing fully on stage. André Rieu felt the music fading behind him and turned to his orchestra, his baton raised. What? And then he saw it. A small boy, barely 6 years old, stood in the middle of the stage. The child looked up at him with big, hopeful eyes, his small hand extended as if for a handshake. The audience collectively held its breath. Thousands watched as the concert abruptly ended and the small drama unfolded. Brixton Kane was now on stage, quickly approaching the child. "Come on, boy," he said kindly but firmly. "You shouldn't be here." But before he could reach Dashiell, something unexpected happened. Dashiell didn't run away from the stage, not toward the security personnel, but directly to André Rieu. "Mr. Violinist," he called out in his clear, childish voice, which could now be heard throughout Symphony Hall thanks to the sudden silence. And before anyone could stop him, Dashiell had wrapped himself around André Rieu's leg, his small arms locked tightly around the violinist's knee. "I love your music," he cried, looking up at his hero. "I listen to it every day. Mom says you're the best violinist in the world." André Rieu stood there, baton still in hand. A small child clung to his leg. Thousands of eyes were on him. Brixton Kane approached from behind, ready to lead the child away. The audience waited breathlessly for what would happen. And then, in a moment that shocked all of America, André Rieu did something unexpected. Instead of stepping back or handing the child over to security, André Rieu knelt down until he was face to face with Dashiell. The entire Symphony Hall held its breath as the world-famous violinist and the small boy looked directly into each other's eyes. "What's your name?" André asked softly, his microphone still on, so everyone could hear. "Dashiell," the little boy whispered, suddenly shy now that he was facing his hero. "And why did you come to me, my dear?" "Because I wanted to tell you that your music makes me happy, and I wanted to ask, can I conduct like you someday?" The question was so innocent, so pure, that the audience seemed to melt. But Brixton Kane was less enthusiastic. "Mr. Rieu," he said sternly, "this isn't possible. The child must leave the stage. There are security protocols." "Wait," André interrupted, his gaze still on Dashiell. "Give me a moment." Sloane had finally reached the stage front in the audience. "Dashiell," she called desperately, "come here now." Dashiell heard his mother, and his face contorted with distress. "Mom's mad at me," he whispered to André. "She's not mad," André said gently. "She's worried. But you know what? I think your mom is very proud of you for being so brave." Thaddeus Sterling stood at the stage edge, speaking urgently into his headset. "This needs to stop now. We have schedules, timelines. The audience expects a show." But the audience seemed to see it differently. Instead of becoming impatient, people began to chant, "Let him stay, give him a chance, let the child conduct." Coral Ashford filmed the entire scene with her phone, realizing she was capturing something special. "This is incredible," she murmured. "Look how sweet he is." André looked around, at his orchestra, at the security personnel, at the audience now clearly behind Dashiell. He was facing a career-defining decision. "Thaddeus," he called to the organizer, "how much time do we have?" "Mr. Rieu, we have a tight schedule." André's voice now had an authority that brooked no opposition. "How much time?" We have 45 minutes scheduled." André nodded and turned back to Dashiell. "Do you see this baton in my hand?" He held it up. Dashiell nodded vigorously. "This is how I tell the musicians how to play. Would you like to try?" The child's eyes widened as if he'd just been told he was going to Disneyland. "Really?" "Really. But first we need to calm your mom. Look, there she is." André pointed to Sloane, who stood at the barrier with tears in her eyes. "May your son conduct a song," he called to her. Sloane was too stunned to answer. It was surreal. Her small, shy son was standing on stage with André Rieu and being asked to conduct an orchestra. "Mom," Dashiell called. "Please, can I?" Through tears, Sloane nodded. What else could she do? Brixton shook his head. "This is against all regulations. If something happens, if the child falls, I'll catch him," André said simply. "Sometimes things are more important than regulations." "Like what?" "Like a child's happiness. Like the moment when dreams come true." André stood up and took Dashiell's hand. "Come, little conductor. Let's show this orchestra what you can do." He led Dashiell to the center of the stage where his conductor's stand stood. The contrast was comical, the large stand and the small boy. But no one laughed. The atmosphere was too emotionally charged. "What song would you like to conduct?" André asked. "The Blue Danube," Dashiell said without hesitation. "That's my favorite." André smiled. "An excellent choice." He signaled to the orchestra to prepare for The Blue Danube. The musicians looked at each other. This was completely unplanned, completely improvised, but there was something in André's demeanor, in the magic of the moment, that made them realize they were witnessing something special. André handed Dashiell his baton. "This is how you hold it," he demonstrated, his large hand over the child's small hands, "and this is how you move it." The audience was now silent. Thousands of people watched as a 6-year-old boy prepared to conduct a world-famous orchestra. "Are you ready?" André asked. Dashiell nodded, his face a mixture of concentration and pure joy. André gave the orchestra a signal. "Ladies and gentlemen, our youngest conductor ever, Dashiell." And with that, he lifted Dashiell so he could be seen better over the music stands, his small hand still holding the baton. The orchestra waited for the signal from their new, very young conductor. Dashiell stood there, lifted in André Rieu'S arms, the baton trembling in his small hand. Before him stretched the entire Johann Strauss orchestra, 50 of the world's best classical musicians, all waiting for instruction from a 6-year-old boy. "What now?" Dashiell whispered to André, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. "Now, you just do what you feel," André whispered back. "Music comes from the heart, not the head." The tension in the audience was palpable. Coral Ashford zoomed in with her phone, knowing this moment would become history. Everywhere around her, people held their breath. Some filmed with their phones, others held their hands over their mouths from emotion. Sloane stood at the barrier, tears streaming down her cheeks. This was her son, her shy, frightened little boy, about to conduct an orchestra in front of thousands of people. Thaddeus Sterling paced nervously off to the side. "This is madness," he muttered into his headset. "We don't have insurance for this kind of improvisation. If something goes wrong, let it happen." The senior producer's voice came through his earpiece. "The audience is completely ready. This will be either magical or a complete disaster, but it will be unforgettable." Brixton Kane was ready to intervene if necessary, but even he realized this moment was bigger than protocols and security regulations. André looked at his orchestra. "Ladies and gentlemen, follow our conductor. He will tell you when to start." Dashiell looked at all the instruments, his eyes wide with wonder. He had seen André Rieu conduct hundreds of times on video. He had mimicked his movements in his room at home, but this was real. "How do I start?" he whispered. "Count to 3 in your head," André whispered back, "and then lower the baton. They'll follow." Dashiell took a deep breath. His small face was a mask of concentration. 1, 2, 3. He lowered the baton, and the orchestra began. The first notes of the ethereal Blue Danube filled Symphony Hall, but this time it was different. The music had something purer, more innocent. Maybe it was the magical context, maybe the emotion of the moment, but the music sounded as if it had been filtered through childlike wonder. Dashiell's eyes widened in amazement as he realized the music was actually following his movements. When he raised the baton, the music got louder. When he moved it gently down, it became softer. "I'm really doing it," he whispered to André, his voice full of wonder. "You're doing fantastically," André whispered back. The audience was enchanted. Thousands watched as a small child lived out his greatest dream. Some cried openly, touched by the purity of the moment. But then, about halfway through the piece, Dashiell's arms began to tremble. His small arms began to tire under the weight of the baton. His concentration was waning. André felt it immediately. "Should I help you?" he whispered. Dashiell nodded, too tired to speak. André placed his hand on Dashiell's, his large fingers guiding his small hands. Now they were conducting together, the maestro and his youngest student. The music built to the climax of the waltz, and with each moment of pressure, it became clearer that this wasn't an ordinary concert. This was a moment of pure magic. As the piece approached its end, Dashiell, with André's help, conducted the last triumphant notes. When the music faded, there was complete silence in Symphony Hall for a moment. Then applause broke out. It wasn't just applause, it was an explosion of pure joy, of emotion, of the recognition that everyone had experienced something unique. People jumped from their seats, clapping, cheering, crying. Dashiell looked over the sea of applauding people, his small face beaming with pride and disbelief. "Did I do that?" he asked André. "You did that," André confirmed, his voice emotional. André carefully lowered Dashiell to the stage and knelt beside him. "How did that feel?" "Like magic," Dashiell said, searching for words. "Like flying." The audience continued clapping. Some shouted, "Bravo, bravo!" Others chanted Dashiell's name. Coral Ashford had stopped filming, too emotional to hold her phone. "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she said to those around her. Thaddeus Sterling stood at the edge with tears in his eyes. All worries about protocols and schedules were forgotten. This was why he had gotten into the music business, for moments like this. Sloane had climbed over the barrier and ran to the stage. André saw her coming and helped her up. "Dashiell!" she called, taking her son in her arms. "I'm so proud of you." "Mom, did you see? I conducted the orchestra, just like the violinist." "I saw everything, my darling. You were beautiful." André stood up and looked at mother and son. "Madam, you have a special son." "I know," Sloane said through tears, "but I never would have dared to dream of this." The audience was now standing. The applause continued. André took his microphone and tried to calm the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice full of emotion, "you experienced something special tonight. Not just a concert, but a reminder of why music exists." He looked at Dashiell. "This brave boy taught us all that dreams have no age, that courage can be stronger than fear, and that music is truly the language of the heart." The applause swelled again, but André wasn't finished yet. "Dashiell," he said, kneeling before the child, "would you like to come back? Next month I'm giving a children's show. Would you like to be my assistant conductor?" Dashiell's eyes widened so much they seemed about to pop out of his head. "Really? Really?" "Yes!" Dashiell shouted so loudly it could be heard throughout Symphony Hall. The audience burst into laughter and applause again. André stood up and took his microphone once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's end this special moment with one last round of applause for our brave conductor, Dashiell." The applause was deafening. People clapped, cheered, and many cried with emotion. Dashiell took a small bow, just as he had seen André Rieu do on television. The next morning, America woke up to a story that would change the country. Coral Ashford's video had gone viral overnight. Within 12 hours, more than 5 million Americans had seen the moment when Dashiell Whitmore walked onto the stage and captured André Rieu's heart. "Young boy conducts Rio Orchestra and moves entire nation to tears," headlined the New York Times. "America's bravest conductor is 6 years old," wrote USA Today. "When dreams come true," Dashiell's story was in the Washington Post. But it wasn't just the newspapers. American television networks interrupted their regular programming to broadcast the story. Radio DJs played the audio of that moment over and over. Social media exploded with reactions from people touched by the purity of the moment. In their small apartment in Boston, Sloane sat at the kitchen table surrounded by printed articles, her phone ringing incessantly. Dashiell played in the living room, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. "Mom!" he called from the living room. "When do I conduct with Mr. André again?" "Soon, sweetheart," Sloane answered, still not quite believing what had happened. The phone rang again. This time it was a producer from NBC asking if Dashiell would like to appear on a talk show. Before that, it had been someone from a magazine, and before that from a radio station. "It's becoming too much," Sloane murmured to herself. Dashiell was still a shy child who struggled in large crowds. How would he handle the national attention? But then the phone rang again, and this time it was a familiar voice. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is André Rieu." Sloane's heart skipped a beat. "Mr. Rieu, how are you and Dashiell doing?" "Overwhelmed," Sloane said honestly. "I've been getting calls all day from the media. Everyone wants to interview him, take photos. I don't know how to handle it." "I thought so," André said kindly. "That's why I'm calling. I have a proposal. I'm listening. My team can help with the media attention. We have experience with these situations. But more importantly, I meant what I said yesterday. I really want Dashiell to be assistant conductor at the children's show next month." "Do you mean that seriously?" "Completely seriously, but on his terms. No pressure, no stress, just enjoying the music." Sloane felt tears come to her eyes. That would be incredible, beautiful. "And Mrs. Whitmore, what you did yesterday wasn't just brave. It was inspiring. It reminded me why I make music." After the conversation, Sloane went into the living room where Dashiell sat on the floor with his toy violin, trying to mimic yesterday's movements. "Dashiell," she said. "Mr. André called." Dashiell jumped up. "Really? What did he say?" "He really wants you to be his assistant at a real concert." "Really, really?" Dashiell began jumping around the room. "Really, really?" Meanwhile, people across America were reacting to the story in unexpected ways. In Los Angeles, a music teacher started a crowdfunding campaign to buy instruments for children who couldn't afford lessons. "If a 6-year-old has the courage to pursue his dreams," he wrote, "then we can have the courage to help him." In Chicago, an elementary school organized a Dashiell Day, where all children could experiment with conducting and playing instruments. In Washington, D.C., the Secretary of Education announced a new subsidy for music education, inspired by the courage of a little boy who showed us all what's possible. But the most beautiful reaction came from an unexpected direction. Brixton Kane, the security officer who had initially tried to remove Dashiell from the stage, appeared on a television interview 3 days later. "I've worked in security for 30 years, he told the interviewer. "My job has always been to enforce rules and maintain order. But that evening, a 6-year-old boy taught me something I hadn't learned in all those years. And what was that? That there are moments when humanity is more important than protocol, that sometimes the most beautiful things happen when we deviate from the plan." Brixton looked directly at the camera. "Dashiell, if you're watching this, thank you. You taught me it's okay to sometimes follow your heart, instead of just your head." A week later, Sloane received a package with no return address. Inside was a small professional baton, exactly the right size for a child's hands, and a note, "For America's bravest conductor," from someone who learned that dreams have no age. The day of the children's performance had arrived. A special concert that André Rieu's had organized at Boston's Symphony Hall, specifically for families with small children. 500 children and their parents had received tickets. Many came from hospitals, special education schools, and families who normally couldn't afford concert tickets. They were specially invited. Backstage, Dashiell was nervous, but excited. He wore a small tuxedo jacket that André's costume designer had designed specifically for him, complete with a little bow tie and shiny shoes. "How do you feel?" André asked, crouching next to him. "Like butterflies, but also like coming home," Dashiell answered. "Perfect. That's exactly how music should feel." André had adapted the program for this occasion. Instead of his usual repertoire, he had selected children's songs and familiar melodies that young ears would recognize and appreciate. "Are you ready for your debut as assistant conductor?" André asked. Dashiell nodded decisively. "I'm ready." When they walked onto the stage, the audience burst into applause. But this time, it was different from last time. This was an audience that knew him, that had come because of him, that believed in him. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls," André announced, "may I introduce my new assistant conductor, Dashiell Whitmore." The applause was deafening. Children jumped on their seats. Parents clapped with tears in their eyes. Dashiell bowed slightly and walked to his own conductor's stand, a smaller version specially made for him. "Today," André said to the audience, "Dashiell and I will show you that music isn't about perfection. It's about joy, about sharing happiness, about daring to try new things." He looked at Dashiell. "Ready, maestro?" "Ready!" Dashiell called, his voice now much more confident than a week ago. They began with "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," a song every American child knew. But under Dashiell's enthusiastic direction, it sounded like a symphony. The audience sang along, clapped along, moved along. It wasn't a traditional classical performance. It was a celebration of music in its purest form. On the second piece, "Mary Had a Little Lamb," André did something special. He handed Dashiell his baton and stepped back. "You're on, boss," he said with a smile. Dashiell conducted the entire song alone, his small arms waving with growing confidence. The orchestra followed his tempo, his dynamics, his interpretation, and even though it wasn't technically perfect, it was emotionally perfect. When the concert ended, the entire audience stood up, but this time they weren't just calling bravo, they were calling thank you. Thank you for showing that dreams come true. Thank you for proving that courage has no age. Thank you for reminding us that music is for everyone. After the concert, during the reception, a little girl Dashiell's age approached him. "Are you the famous conductor?" "I am," he said simply. "I want to learn to conduct. I can teach you." And there, in a corner of the reception area, Dashiell gave another child her first conducting lesson. His small hands guided her movements, just as André had done with him. Sloane watched him from a distance, her heart full of pride and love. Her anxious, worried son had transformed, not into someone else, but into the best version of himself. André stood next to her. "He's a natural," he said. "No," Sloane said quietly. "He's just finally himself. And that," André said, "is the most beautiful music of all." 6 months later, Dashiell had his own small orchestra in Boston. They rehearsed weekly at the community center and gave concerts in nursing homes, schools, and hospitals. André invited them once a month to play with his professional orchestra. Dashiell was no longer an exception. He was the beginning of a movement. Schools across America began implementing programs for children. The Dashiell baton, small batons for children, became the most popular educational toy of the year. But for Dashiell himself, the biggest change wasn't the fame or attention. It was the disappearance of his fears, replaced by confidence. It was the discovery that despite his age, he could give something valuable to the world. And every evening before bed, he still conducted one last song in his room, no longer out of loneliness or longing, but out of pure joy, because he had learned that dreams don't just come true. They can also inspire others to pursue their own. 1 year later, during André Rieu'S annual New Year's concert, Dashiell was invited to speak to the audience. At his age, but with the wisdom of someone who had learned that anything can change, he said, "Last year I was afraid of many things. Now I'm only afraid of not pursuing my dreams. So I tell all the kids watching, get on stage." He smiled. "Not literally, but figuratively. Pursue your dreams, because the adults will help you if you show them you really want it." He looked at André, who stood next to him with tears in his eyes. "And sometimes," Dashiell added, "they'll even give you an orchestra to play with. The audience laughed and clapped, but all across America, there were parents looking at their children and thinking, "What is your dream and how can I help you achieve it?" Because that was the true power of Dashiell's story. Not that a child had conducted an orchestra, but that a child had shown it was possible to set aside fears and pursue dreams, and that some rules can indeed wait, but a child's heart never can. Dashiell Whitmore, now 8 years old, still conducts. With the help of his mother and André Rieu'S, he founded his own foundation, Little Conductors, Big Dreams, which provides music lessons to children who otherwise couldn't afford them. André Rieu'S still calls him his assistant conductor and invites him to special occasions, but more importantly, he taught him that true leadership isn't about controlling others, but about inspiring them to give their best. The foundation grew rapidly. Within 2 years, they had chapters in 15 American cities. Thousands of children who had never touched an instrument were now learning piano, violin, flute, and drums. Sloane quit her regular job to work full-time for the foundation. She traveled across the country, speaking at schools, meeting with donors, and sharing Dashiell's story to inspire other children. "Every child has a stage moment waiting for them," she would tell audiences. "Our job as adults is to help them find it." One particularly moving moment came when the foundation received a letter from a mother in rural Montana. "Dear Dashiell, my son Tommy has autism and rarely speaks, but after watching your video, he asked for a violin. It was the first thing he'd asked for in 2 years. Now he plays every day. Music gave him a voice when words couldn't. Thank you for showing him, and me, that different doesn't mean incapable." With gratitude, Sarah Mitchell Dashiell insisted on personally responding to every letter the foundation received. Sometimes he'd send a video message, other times a handwritten note. For him, it was important that every child knew they were seen and heard. The Dashiell effect, as some media outlets called it, had profound implications across America. Congress passed the Music Education Accessibility Act, providing federal funding for music programs in underfunded schools. During the bill signing, the president invited Dashiell to the White House. "This young man reminded us," the president said with Dashiell standing beside him, "that art and music aren't luxuries, they're necessities. They give our children confidence, creativity, and connection." Dashiell, still shy in some situations, whispered to his mother, "Is this really happening?" "It's really happening, sweetheart," Sloane whispered back. Major orchestras across the country began hosting young conductor programs where children could experience what Dashiell had experienced. The New York Philharmonic, the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and the Chicago Symphony Orchestra all launched initiatives. But perhaps the most touching development came from an unexpected source. Brixton Kane, the security chief who had initially tried to remove Dashiell from the stage, left his position to start a non-profit called Second Chances Security. The organization trained security personnel to recognize moments when breaking protocol might create magic rather than chaos. "I spent 3 decades saying no to keep people safe," Brixton said in an interview. "Dashiell taught me that sometimes the most dangerous thing is saying no to possibility." He and Dashiell became friends. Brixton attended every one of Dashiell's concerts, always standing backstage, ready to help if needed, but now as a supporter rather than an obstacle. 2 years after that fateful night, André Rieu'S organized a special concert at Boston's Symphony Hall, Dreams Have No Age, a celebration. It would feature Dashiell, now 8 years old, conducting alongside André. But it would also showcase other children whose lives had been changed by music. There was Harmony, a 10-year-old girl from Atlanta who had been homeless but now played piano at concert halls. There was Miguel, a boy from Texas who had lost his hearing but could feel music through vibrations and now composed pieces that moved audiences to tears. There was Zara, a wheelchair user from Seattle who had designed adaptive instruments so other children with disabilities could play. The night before the concert, all the young musicians gathered for rehearsal. Dashiell stood before them, now a seasoned conductor despite his age. "Tomorrow," he told them, "we're not performing for the audience. We're performing for every kid who's ever been told they can't, for every kid who's been too scared to try. We're showing them what's possible." The children nodded, their faces serious with understanding. André watched from the wings, his heart full. "He's become quite the leader," he said to Sloane, who stood beside him. "He learned from the best," Sloane replied, smiling through tears. The concert the next night was transcendent. Each child had a moment to shine. Each story was told. And when Dashiell conducted the finale, a specially commissioned piece called The Courage Symphony, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. The music swelled and soared, incorporating elements from each child's cultural background. It was American music in the truest sense, diverse, bold, and beautifully unified. As the final note faded, the audience rose as one. The applause lasted nearly 10 minutes. Dashiell stood at the conductor's podium, surrounded by his fellow young musicians, and said into the microphone, "2 years ago I was too scared to talk to strangers. Tonight I'm talking to thousands of you. If I can change, anyone can. If I can achieve my dream, anyone can. The only question is, what's your stage, what's your dream, and when will you be brave enough to climb up and grab it?" 5 years after that night, Dashiell Whitmore, now 11 years old, was invited to give a TED Talk. He walked onto the stage, no longer needing to be lifted, no longer trembling with fear, and began, "When I was 6, I did something I wasn't supposed to do. I broke the rules. I climbed onto a stage without permission, and it changed my life." He paused, looking out at the audience. "But here's what I learned. Sometimes the rules are there to protect us, and sometimes they're there to be questioned. The trick is knowing which is which." He told his story, not as a tale of individual triumph, but as an example of what happens when adults choose to nurture rather than shut down a child's passion. Mr. Rieu'S could have had security remove me. He would have been right to do so. But instead, he knelt down. He looked me in the eye. He asked me what I wanted, and then he made it happen. Dashiell's voice grew stronger. "That's what adults can do for kids. Not just my mum, not just André Rieu'S, but teachers, coaches, neighbors, strangers. When you see a kid reaching for something, even if it seems impossible, even if it breaks the rules, ask yourself, is this dangerous? Or is this just different? Is this wrong? Or is this just unexpected?" The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Because 5 years ago a 6-year-old boy climbed onto a stage, and it didn't just change his life, it changed thousands of lives. It started a movement. It reminded a country that magic happens when we say yes instead of no. He smiled, that same pure smile from the night he first held a conductor's baton. "So I'm asking you, when a child reaches for their dream, will you be the person who stops them, or the person who hands them the baton?" The TED Talk went viral, viewed over 50 million times in the first month alone. At 15, Dashiell received a full scholarship to the prestigious Juilliard School in New York City. He was the youngest conductor in the school's history to be admitted to their graduate program. But before he left Boston, he wanted to do one more thing. He organized a free concert at Symphony Hall, the same venue where his journey had begun. Every seat was filled with children from underprivileged backgrounds, kids who had never been to a concert before. André Rieu'S flew in from the Netherlands specifically for the event. Before the concert began, Dashiell stood on stage, now almost as tall as André, and looked out at the sea of young faces. 9 years ago, he said, "I sat where you're sitting. I was scared. I was small. I didn't think I belonged here." He gestured around the magnificent hall, but something inside me was stronger than my fear, and when I followed that feeling, my whole life changed. He pointed to random children in the audience. "You, and you, and you in the back. You all have that feeling too, that pull towards something you love, that dream that seems too big." His voice filled with emotion. "Don't wait for permission. Don't wait until you're older, braver, or better. The stage is waiting. Your dream is waiting. And the world needs what only you can give." Then Dashiell did something unprecedented. He invited every child in the audience who wanted to come on stage. Hundreds of children flooded forward, some excited, some nervous, all hopeful. "Today," Dashiell announced, "you're all conductors." What followed was glorious chaos. Hundreds of children waving their arms, some in time with the music, some completely off beat. The orchestra gamely followed along, adapting to the unpredictable directions. It wasn't perfect. It was better than perfect. It was pure, unfiltered joy. André stood beside Dashiell, both of them conducting the mass of children who were conducting the orchestra. "This," André said to Dashiell, his voice thick with emotion, "this is what that night was always meant to become." Dashiell nodded, tears streaming down his face. "We gave them permission to dream." 20 years after a 6-year-old boy climbed onto a stage in Boston, the world was different. Little conductors, big dreams now operated in 47 countries. Over 1 million children had gone through their programs. Many had become professional musicians. More importantly, all had learned that their dreams mattered. Dashiell Whitmore, now 26, was the youngest conductor to ever lead a major American symphony orchestra. He had conducted at Carnegie Hall, the Kennedy Center, and concert halls around the world. But his favorite performances were still the small ones. in hospitals, schools, and community centers, places where children needed to be reminded that they mattered. André Rieu, now in his 70s, had retired from touring, but he came out of retirement for one final concert, a celebration of 2 decades since the night everything changed, as it had come to be known. They stood together on the stage of Boston's Symphony Hall once more. André held the same violin he'd played that night. Dashiell stood at the conductor's podium, no longer needing to be lifted. 20 years ago, Dashiell said to the packed audience, a scared little boy broke the rules, and a kind man said yes when he could have said no. He looked at André with profound gratitude. That choice, that single moment of choosing possibility over protocol, created ripples that are still spreading. Children who never would have played music now lead orchestras. Schools that couldn't afford instruments now have full programs. Kids who felt invisible finally feel seen. The audience applauded, but Dashiell held up his hand. But the story isn't about me. It's about what happens when we create space for dreams, when we choose compassion over convenience, when we remember that rules serve people, not the other way around. He raised his baton. Tonight, we'll play the piece that started it all, the Blue Danube. But first, I want to invite someone very special to conduct, the audience murmured, wondering who it could be. Dashiell smiled and gestured to the wings. A small boy, no more than 6 years old, walked tentatively onto the stage. He had the same nervous energy, the same wide eyes, the same desperate hope that Dashiell had once carried. This is Marcus, Dashiell said. He has selective mutism and severe anxiety. Music is the only thing that helps him feel calm, and he has one dream. Dashiell knelt down just as André had once knelt before him. Would you like to conduct, Marcus? The boy nodded, unable to speak. Dashiell handed him the baton. Not a toy, not a prop, but a real conductor's baton. Then the stage is yours. As Marcus raised the baton, his small hand shaking, the audience understood. The circle was complete. The gift was being passed forward. The magic was continuing. The orchestra began to play, following a 6-year-old's uncertain but determined direction. And in that moment, everyone in Symphony Hall understood the truth. Dreams don't have an age limit. Courage doesn't require permission. And sometimes, the most beautiful thing you can do is simply say yes to someone reaching for the impossible. This story is a reminder that children are not just our future, they are our present. Their dreams, their courage, their unfiltered belief in possibility. These are gifts we often forget to honor. Every Dashiell in this world is waiting for their André, someone who will kneel down, make eye contact and say, yes, you can try. Be that person. Say yes to the impossible. Hand someone the baton. And watch what happens when you do.